Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping straight into a really pivotal moment here, one that seems to have reshaped security dynamics in South Asia.
That's right. It started on April 22nd, 2025. Just a devastating terror attack in Pahalgam, Jammu, and Kashmir.
And this wasn't, just random violence.
No, not at all. The information we have points to it being a calculated act by Pakistan-backed assailants. Tragically, 26 innocent people lost their lives.
26, 25 Indian citizens, and one Nepali tourist, I believe.
Correct. And what stood out, what made it particularly heinous, was the targeting. It was based on religious identity, clearly an attempt to inflame communal tensions to try and fracture India's internal unity.
A truly horrific calculation, and the reaction internationally.
Immediate and widespread condemnation from, across the globe, which then led to India's response, Operation SINDOOR.
Right, SINDOOR. And that's what we're here to unpack today. We want to get into the source material on this operation.
Exactly. Understand the strategy, how it was executed, because it was multidimensional, what the outcomes were, the gains for India.
And this connection to Atmanirbhar Bharat, India's self-reliance initiative, that seems like a key piece.
A crucial piece. It's about pulling out those core insights, really understanding why this moment was so significant.
Okay, so let's start right after the attack. Prime Minister Modi made a very public statement, didn't he?
He did, yes. Very unequivocal. He committed publicly that India would relentlessly identify, track, and ensure punishment, not just for the terrorists, but their state sponsors, too.
That's strong language. But was it just rhetoric?
Well, the sources suggest it signaled a real strategic shift. Operation SINDOOR wasn't planned as just, tit-for-tat retaliation. It was designed as a comprehensive, multidimensional response.
Multidimensional meaning?
Meaning it integrated military action with diplomatic efforts, economic pressure, and information warfare. A recognition that modern security challenges need that kind of full-spectrum approach.
So it wasn't just about hitting back militarily within Kashmir, for example.
Precisely. The nature of the Pahalgam attack, targeting religious groups like that, it was seen as an intensification of Pakistan's asymmetric warfare. SINDOOR was India basically declaring new normal.
A new normal. What does that mean in practice?
It means shifting from a largely reactive posture, responding inside India after an attack, to proactive deterrence, taking the fight, the action, directly to the terrorist sanctuaries, even across the border.
That is a significant change in doctrine, and the main objective behind this shift.
The core goal, as laid out, was pretty stark. Raise the cost of sponsoring cross-border terrorism so high that it becomes unbearable for Pakistan.
To force a change.
To deter future attacks and, yes, compel a verifiable change in state behavior. India was making it clear. Zero tolerance now includes direct cross-border action if needed.
Okay, let's dig into the execution then, because this multidimensional aspect is key. Walk us through the military side first.
All right. The military operations kicked off on the night of May 6th, going into the 7th. It was a tri-services effort launched from Indian territory.
And the strikes themselves.
Designed to be extremely precise, they targeted 9 specific major terror launch pads and hideouts.
Associated with the groups behind Pahalgam.
Yes, exactly. Groups like Lairati, Jem, Hizbul Mujahideen, located in Pakistan, and Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The information suggests this was based on a really detailed, microscopic scan of the terror landscape, intelligence-driven.
And that initial phase was described as, what, focused and non-escalatory? How did they manage that?
By deliberately not targeting Pakistani military sites in that first wave, the focus was purely on the terror infrastructure.
What kind of technology was involved?
Reports indicate the use of advanced precision-guided munitions. Things like Scalp-E cruise missiles, hammer munitions, likely delivered by Rafale jets. This really points to that focus on hitting only the intended targets, minimizing other damage.
Okay. How did Pakistan respond to these strikes?
Pakistan escalated significantly. Over the next few days, they launched a massive number of drones. Estimates are between 300 and 400.
Wow. Where are they targeting?
Across 36 different locations, stretching from J&K all the way down to Gujarat. And their targets were explicitly Indian military infrastructure.
And not just drones.
No, they also used shelling. And this is a key point. They deliberately targeted religious sites inside India. The Shambhu Temple in Jammu, a Gurdwara in Poonch, even Christian convents. A very clear, very provocative attempt to stir up communal trouble within India.
That's a dangerous escalation, targeting religious sites. How did India counter that?
India managed to neutralize the vast majority of those drone threats. Sources do mention some limited damage at a few Air Force stations, Udhampur, Pathankot, Adhampur, Bhuj, Bathinda, but the defense is largely held.
And India responded militarily to this escalation.
Yes, with what were described as swift and calibrated counterattacks. These hit 11 Pakistani air bases. Names like Nur Khan, Murid, Rafiqi came up.
Targeting what specifically on those bases?
Again, precision was emphasized. Identified military infrastructure, command and control centers, radar installations, weapon storage areas, air-launched precision weapons were used here too.
So even when hitting back against military targets, India maintained its stance.
Yes, that's a consistent thread. India kept reiterating, our actions are only against terror camps and the military facilities supporting them. They stressed ensuring minimum collateral damage and explicitly stated no harm upon Pakistani civilians, despite the provocations.
And did the shooting eventually stop?
It did. On May 10th, the DGMOs, the Directors General of Military Operations from both sides, agreed to an immediate ceasefire, halting all firing, all military actions.
And transparency was maintained.
India seemed to make a point of it. The Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri, gave regular briefings to keep the public and the world informed.
Okay, so that's the military piece. But as you said, Sindoor was much broader. Let's talk about the non-military, the diplomatic offensive.
Right, and this ran completely in parallel. A major front was the information war. Pakistan, as you'd expect, pushed disinformation campaigns, especially online.
Standard playbook, perhaps? How did India respond on that front?
Proactively, by disseminating facts, maintaining transparency, really showing digital vigilance. They actively worked to debunk false claims coming from Pakistan.
Like what kinds of claims?
For instance, claims about Indian air bases being destroyed. India countered by showing evidence of normalcy at those bases, exposing what were called ludicrous claims.
And why is controlling that narrative so important?
Oh, it's absolutely crucial in modern conflict. It helps build international diplomatic support, legitimizes your actions, and it limits your adversary's ability to maneuver on the world stage.
Did India take its case directly to other countries? I remember reading about a delegation.
Yes, a significant diplomatic outreach. An all-party Indian parliamentary delegation, actually led by BJP MP Jay Panda, traveled extensively, particularly across the Muslim world, the Middle East.
What was their message?
To clearly articulate India's perspective, to explain Pakistan's complicity in the Pahalgam attack, and frame India's response not just as a bilateral issue, but as part of the global fight against terrorism. They emphasized that Islam itself condemns such violence.
And using the diaspora, too.
Yes, engaging the Indian diaspora in those countries was part of it, helping convey that Pakistan, being a Muslim-majority nation, doesn't somehow give it a pass for supporting terrorism.
No, this next part seems like a really strategic, almost unexpected move, the economic measures. Suspending the Indus Waters Treaty.
This was huge, a really potent non-military lever. India announced it was terminating the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty, or at least holding it in abeyance.
With conditions for restarting it.
Exactly. The condition was crystal clear. Pakistan must credibly and irrevocably abjure its support for cross-border terrorism. Only then would the treaty potentially be reinstated.
What's the potential impact of that on Pakistan? It sounds major.
It's potentially immense. Pakistan is incredibly reliant on the Indus River system. We're talking water for 80% of its agriculture, something like 93% of its total water usage.
Supporting millions of people and a big chunk of their economy.
It supports 237 million people, directly linked to about a quarter of their GDP. So disrupting that flow could cause catastrophic agricultural failure, food shortages, severe water rationing, power blackouts, not to mention fiscal and foreign exchange crises.
So India essentially turned a vital lifeline into a strategic weapon. What was the game for India besides the pressure on Pakistan?
Well, suspending the treaty gives India full control over the western rivers, the Jhelum and Chenab. Under the treaty, most of that water was allocated to Pakistan.
Meaning India could use that water?
Yes. It opens the door for India to build new reservoirs, boost irrigation, generate more hydroelectric power in places like J&K, Ladakh, Punjab, Haryana. It basically transforms a diplomatic constraint into a potential developmental asset for India.
And sends a powerful message.
A very powerful one. The phrase used was stark. Blood and water cannot flow together.
Were there other economic actions besides the IWT?
Yes. India also shut down the Atari-Wagah border crossing, the mainland route, and suspended all bilateral trade.
Cutting off trade entirely.
Halted exports like onions, banned imports like cement and textiles from Pakistan. Severing that primary land trade route caused immediate economic disruption, particularly for Pakistan.
And diplomatic ties took a hit as well.
They did. Formal downgrade of relations. India declared senior Pakistani diplomats persona non grata, meaning they had to leave. Visas for Pakistani nationals were suspended.
Did Pakistan retaliate diplomatically?
Yes, they responded in kind. Suspended visas for Indians, closed their airspace to Indian-operated aircraft. Tit for tat on the diplomatic front.
Okay, so pulling this picture of Operation SINDOOR together, it's a complex tapestry. Military strikes, yes, but woven with aggressive diplomacy, serious economic pressure, and this information war.
That's the core of it. A truly integrated approach, using all the tools of state power at the same time. The IWT suspension is probably the most striking example of using those long-term strategic levers alongside the immediate kinetic action.
It wasn't just about responding to Pahalgam then.
No, it was about establishing that new normal, imposing sustained systemic costs, economic and diplomatic, on Pakistan, aiming for a fundamental shift in their calculus regarding terrorism. It really signals a more assertive, perhaps less constrained, India foreign policy going forward.
All right, let's shift focus now to the outcomes. What were the strategic gains for India from Operation SINDOOR, based on what we're seeing?
Well, first, the direct counter-terrorism gains. Neutralizing terrorist infrastructure, enhancing deterrence. The operation took out those 9 launch pads and resulted in, reports say, over 100 terrorists killed from Letli, GEM, HEM.
And damage to Pakistani forces, too.
Sources indicate heavy damage was inflicted. There were claims of downed Pakistani jets, successful strikes on key military installations.
Though India maintained its non-escalatory stance on civilian harm.
Absolutely. India consistently refuted Pakistani counterclaims about things like civilian casualties or supposedly downed Indian jets, sticking to the narrative of precision strikes against legitimate targets. This decisive action was meant to degrade current capabilities and strongly deter future aggression, enforcing that zero-tolerance policy.
It also feels like a major statement about India's own military capabilities and its resolve.
It definitely was. SINDOOR served as a powerful demonstration. India showcased its ability to conduct precision strikes, react rapidly to escalation, and effectively neutralize complex threats like mass drone attacks.
Was there a review afterwards?
Yes, the Chief of Defense Staff, General Anil Chauhan, conducted a strategic review. It emphasized vigilance, jointness between the services, synergy, and highlighted the success particularly of the Northern and Western commands in handling the situation.
And doing so autonomously.
That's a key point. It underscored India's capacity to act decisively based on its own intelligence and military capabilities without being overly reliant on external support. That allows for more autonomous strategic decision-making.
How did the rest of the world view this complex response? Was there international support?
By and large, yes. The global community seemed quite supportive of India's position. You had numerous countries condemning the Pahalgam attack and expressing solidarity.
Which countries are we talking about?
Wide range, actually. The UK, Russia, Israel, the US, France, the Netherlands, Japan, but also key nations in the Middle East like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Qatar, plus others like Panama, Sri Lanka, the EU, Maldives. They acknowledged India's right to self-defense.
And India used this moment to reiterate its stance on Kashmir.
It did, very firmly, stating the only outstanding issue is the return of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. No dialogue without verifiable action against terror from Pakistan, and absolutely no third-party mediation.
So that diplomatic push, especially into the Muslim world, and managing the information flow paid off.
It seems so. Engaging those key countries, effectively countering Pakistan's narrative that was crucial in building international support, and further isolating Pakistan on the issue of state-sponsored terror. It really shows how India sees diplomacy as a force multiplier, working hand in glove with military action to legitimize its stance and maintain the moral high ground.
The sources also seem to credit strong leadership during this period.
Yes, Prime Minister Modi's leadership is highlighted, steering what's described as one of India's boldest military responses. It's portrayed as a careful balancing act, strategic restraint when needed, but decisive action when required, all underpinned by meticulous planning.
And his framing of SINDOOR as a new dimension, a new normal.
That language is significant. It signals a hardening of India's posture, effectively rejecting any notion of nuclear blackmail holding India back and making it clear. No distinction between the terrorists on the ground and the state sponsors behind them.
All of which presumably boosts India's deterrence credibility significantly.
You'd have to assume so. Killing over 100 terrorists is concrete validation of the zero-tolerance policy. The demonstrated ability to inflict substantial damage, both on terror infrastructure and military targets, and ultimately compel a ceasefire that shows India can impose unacceptable costs.
Changing the risk calculation for any adversary.
Exactly. It moves deterrence from just being a theoretical threat to a proven capability. This strengthens India's regional standing, makes it a more formidable deterrent force, and internationally, it likely positions India as a more reliable counterterrorism partner, potentially opening doors for greater intelligence sharing.
Okay, now let's pivot to that fascinating connection, the one that might not be immediately obvious. How Operation SINDOOR links to India's big push for self-reliance, Atmanirbhar Bharat, particularly in defense.
This is a really powerful link highlighted in the material. SINDOOR is framed almost as a crucial real-world validation, a test case, if you will, for Atmanirbhar Bharat.
Showing the results of those policy changes and investments in domestic defense manufacturing.
Precisely. It wasn't just about theory anymore. The operation showcased the tangible outcomes. Indigenous military tech wasn't just present, it was used effectively.
So homegrown systems saw action in a major operation.
Yes, and performed well. The success of SINDOOR is presented as concrete proof of the effectiveness of these domestically developed systems. Some sources even noted they outperformed expectations in the field.
Can you give some examples of these indigenous systems used?
Sure. Domestically produced drones like the Nagastra-1 and the Sky Striker were reportedly used for surveillance and precision strikes.
And air defense.
Critically, yes. The indigenous Akash surface-to-air missile system. It proved highly effective against a range of threats, UAVs, jets, even ballistic missiles and rockets.
And there was a comparison made to foreign systems.
Yes, and this is quite remarkable. The sources specifically mentioned that the Akash system actually outperformed foreign-supplied air defense systems that Pakistan might have been using, possibly from places like Turkey or China, in the operational context of this conflict.
Wow, outperforming established foreign tech in battle. That's huge.
And also the Pinaka multi-barrel rocket launcher system, ensuring a reliable, rapid supply of munitions, all domestically produced.
What's the broader significance of this kind of validation for Atmanirbhar Bharat?
Oh, it's monumental.
Yeah.
This isn't just a lab test, it's operational proof of concept. It provides undeniable evidence that India's indigenous tech is not just viable, it's effective, it's competitive.
Which should boost confidence and investment.
You'd expect so. It's likely to accelerate further investment, R&D, and, crucially, the adoption by the Indian Armed Forces. It also provides incredibly powerful marketing material for selling Indian defense products globally. Real-world performance data is gold.
And builds confidence within the Indian military itself.
Absolutely. Breaking down maybe some residual psychological dependence on imported equipment, it boosts the credibility of the entire Indian defense industry on the world stage, potentially attracting more exports, FDI, technology transfers, solidifying India's ambition to be a defense hub.
And the growth numbers in the defense sector certainly seem to reflect a transformation underway.
They really do. The figures are striking. Defense manufacturing value hitting, 1.27 lakh crore in FY 23-24. That's up 174% from around 46,000 crore back in 2014-15.
And the budget itself.
The defense budget has also climbed significantly, from about 2.53 lakh crore in 2013-14 to projected 6.81 lakh crore for 2025-26. That's roughly a 169% increase.
With very ambitious targets going forward.
Extremely ambitious, aiming to quadruple annual output to 3 lakh crore by 2028-29, and the export numbers. Just phenomenal growth.
How much have exports grown?
Nearly a 30-fold increase over 10 years, from about 686 crore to over 21,000 crore in FY 23-24. The target now is 50,000 crore in exports by 2029.
That kind of leap doesn't just happen. There must be policy drivers behind it.
Definitely. Key policies are credited. Things like prioritizing domestic procurement in the Defense Acquisition Procedure, DAP 2020, announcing specific lists of equipment, platforms that must be sourced domestically. These positive indigenization lists cover hundreds of items now off limits for import.
What about fostering innovation, especially with smaller players?
That's where schemes like IDEX Innovations for Defense Excellence come in. Launched in 2018, it's specifically designed to engage startups and MSMEs in defense tech. By early 2025, it had engaged over 600 such entities, signed hundreds of contracts.
Yeah, newer initiatives.
There's the ADITI scheme, offering significant grants up to 25 crore for developing really critical strategic technologies. We're talking satellite comms, cyber autonomous systems, semiconductors, AI, quantum underwater tech, the cutting edge.
Plus efforts to attract investment and encourage industry participation.
Right. liberalizing FDI rules, allowing up to 74% automatically and potentially 100% through government approval, and supporting make projects where the government funds prototype development or industry funds import substitution efforts.
It sounds like they're also embracing modern manufacturing techniques.
Yes, the integration of Industry 4.0 concepts is mentioned. Automation, robotics, smart factories, additive manufacturing, 3D printing, all aimed at enhancing precision, cutting production times, making the whole process more efficient.
So this combination of growth, validated performance in operations like SINDOOR, and policy support, it logically feeds into boosting exports and India's global standing.
It's a direct link. That dramatic surge in exports, now reaching over 100 nations, shows India can produce high-quality, cost-effective defense equipment that meets global standards.
And this ties into broader strategic goals.
Absolutely. This push for self-reliance at Atmanirbhar Bharat aligns perfectly with the vision of India as a net security provider, particularly in the Indian Ocean region. Stronger domestic capability enhances naval power, projection capabilities, and facilitates defense partnerships with neighbors and allies. Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Australia, ASEAN nations.
And the ultimate goal underpinning all of this, strategic autonomy.
That's the bedrock. Historically, India was very reliant on imports, sometimes up to 70% of its defense needs. Every success with indigenous technology, especially one validated in a conflict scenario like SINDOOR, chips away at that dependency.
Giving India more freedom of action.
Much greater flexibility. Freedom from potential constraints like sanctions, supply chain disruptions, or political strings that can come attached to foreign arms deals.
So being able to build and sustain your own military hardware means you can make decisions without external interference.
Precisely. It significantly enhances geopolitical leverage, bolsters that net security provider role, strengthens the entire national security framework, and reduces critical vulnerabilities in what's clearly a very uncertain world.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together then, based on everything we've unpacked from the sources. Operation SINDOOR really does feel like a landmark moment.
A landmark, yes. A comprehensive, multifaceted response that achieves success across different domains: military, diplomatic, economic, informational.
And we see this really clear, almost symbiotic relationship, don't we, between SINDOOR's operational success and the progress of Atmanirbhar Bharat.
Undeniably. SINDOOR was that critical, real-world crucible. And indigenous technology didn't just participate, it performed effectively, even, as the sources suggest, outperforming foreign systems in some cases.
Which in turn acts as a powerful catalyst for the self-reliance drive.
You have to think so. That real-world validation is compelling proof. It should logically accelerate investment, R&D, and significantly boost the global credibility of India's entire defense ecosystem.
So SINDOOR really does seem to represent this new paradigm in India's security thinking.
A paradigm characterized by more assertive deterrence, definitely greater strategic autonomy, rooted in that growing self-reliance, and this truly integrated approach to statecraft, leveraging all instruments of national power in concert.
It paints a picture of a nation consciously building its economic and industrial base specifically to underpin its strategic goals, systematically reducing that reliance on others for its own security and influence.
And the interconnectedness is key. The military effectiveness demonstrated in SINDOOR relied partly on the performance of indigenous tech. That tech is the result of Atmanirbhar Bharat policies and production. And then, SINDOOR's success loops back to reinforce the credibility of Atmanirbhar Bharat, driving more investment, more innovation. It's a virtuous cycle.
And all the while, India's expanding defense production and exports are solidifying its international position.
Positioning it as, yes, a reliable global defense partner, but also an increasingly formidable international player in its own right.
So reflecting on all this, the integrated statecraft, the validated self-reliance showcase in Operation SINDOOR, here's a final thought to leave our listeners with. How might this fundamentally alter India's playbook for future security challenges, not just regionally, but in how it shapes the wider geopolitical landscape? What questions does this tightening link between a nation's economic strength and its security independence raise for you as you look ahead?